everybody, Gurmy's Coaster Yard here, and welcome back to another episode of Germanator Studios. In today's episode, we are going to be finishing off the bulk of our spooky section of the park. Aside from a few potentially small details that I may have overlooked, we are going to be finishing off the scenery, starting here with the border. So, in the border, we are putting a bunch of trees because, of course, we're in sort of a haunted forest. And I ended up alternating between the medium-sized sugar pines and the large sugar pines in an alternating order. And you may have noticed I have a bit of an affinity for sugar pines. And I don't have any excuse for that. And I think maybe in the future, or maybe in the future of the series, we'll go back and change some of these out for different trees. I just really like the way they look, especially for the height, because they are a dark tree and very tall. But yeah, I think ultimately it's not always so realistic having just one type of tree. So I suppose if I were to come to a conclusion based on that, it would be in your own builds. Maybe try to add some more variety than I have, because I know that's definitely where I tend to fall short. And I am not above admitting my shortcomings as a designer, and I think always analyzing where you fall short is what helps you to get better. So I think it's worth pointing out. But I guess on the subject of variety, even though along the border we did have a lot of just only sugar pines, along here at the front of our haunted house attraction, which I think I ended up calling Haunted Manor as a working title, we did put the trees from the spooky scenery section. So I think I used like the haunted oak tree or whatever it's called, and some ash trees as well along the front. And we're just doing some more work to make this front area look kind of run down and spooky. So I started by putting in those trees, and I put in some topiaries. Another thing I worked on throughout the whole section was putting in the muddy grass paint texture, just to make it feel a little more dead. I still wanted it to be green because it's still a forest and everything, but I like the muddy grass texture because I think it sort of sells that look of just decay and a forest that maybe is not dead but it's dying, if that makes sense. So we worked to put that around the place. And then along here we put some banner signs to label the Fear Ground area of our park. And what are we doing here? That's where I renamed the ride. And along here, I am replacing the fences of our attraction with something a little more fitting. So we went with the rusty iron fences that are part of the spooky scenery, just to fit the attraction a little bit better and make it look a little less generic. And I think it turned out pretty well. And of course, we changed up the exit too, I believe. And I don't remember what we're doing right here. Oh yes, I was doing the one thing you should do with every ride, and that is figuring out how many ride vehicles you need, and figuring out the interval to make sure you have enough ride vehicles in the station at a time, with enough traversing the layout. So the only way to set your intervals is to turn the ride, or to open the ride, so turn that little flag to green, and then if you go into the settings, you can see the minimum wait time and the maximum wait time in the upper right side of that little box. And usually for most roller coasters, I find around 40 to 45 seconds for both of those is a good starting point. But I like to find a starting point where I just set one number for both of them, and then I'll work my way up and down by intervals of 5, and usually I only need that 10-second window. This is more for roller coasters right now, what I'm talking about. But for this ride, because you have shorter cars, so each car only has 2 people, which means you can load it a lot quicker, which means you don't need 45 seconds to dispatch the ride. And I believe I set mine to from 10 to 15 seconds. And that is plenty of time to load one of these vehicles. maybe it would, in real life, it would require a little more time to load a vehicle and check the restraints and dispatch it. but ultimately I'm not concerned about hyper realism. I just want to make sure it's realistic enough to get by, and I found that 10 to 15 seconds works, and I believe we ended up with 8 to 10 ride vehicles on the ride. I ultimately think that worked out for the ride, and of course, when you have your ride open, the 10 to 15 seconds is usually for an empty line. If you have people in line, it may take a little longer or a little quicker than that. Um, but yeah, you can be sure that it'll wait the minimum amount of time to dispatch, but the maximum may be a little bit longer, just depending on the mechanics of the station and the people loading onto the ride. Anyhow, hopefully that makes enough sense. And I have some more roller coasters planned for this park, so there will be more opportunities to talk about that concept. Anyhow, along here we are doing more lighting and more sort of infrastructure work with the paths themselves, adding in the trash cans. And I went with my normal, um, just generic lights on the inside of the mansion. Um, the spooky lights, I think they're called Gothic lamps, um, are a little bit bulky for my taste, especially for something indoors, but I did use those on the queue line, the outdoor portion of the queue leading into our haunted manor. And I believe I used them in part of the outdoor area of this section, but I can't remember. But we should see that at some point, or maybe we already did see it and I talked over it. I guess we'll find out. And one thing I'm doing here with the chimney is adding a cap, I guess you could call it, just because it's a big open chimney. You don't want rain getting in there, because not only would it put out the fire, but it would also get into the mansion, and you don't want that. So I'm sorry, the manor, and you don't want that. So and most modern chimneys have something similar anyway. So granted, that's a huge chimney. That might be a little bulky of a cap, but it gets the point across. And then along there with the greenhouse and the rest of the parks or the area's border, we are extending the height of the wall to be 2 high instead of 1 high, and I'm also adjusting it along here. In the last episode, I wanted it to go right up against that little iron gateway or the iron fence, um, which I think worked. But was because I was able to add trees behind it, I decided I wanted the trees to be the primary thing you see behind it and not a green wall. That's kind of a sad excuse for a hedge. So I went behind the trees to put the wall there, and I think that worked a lot better in the end. And you'll notice between the building and those trees, I left one gap for the wall to remain open. And that's just for people who are behind the scenes, employees, to be able to get in front or into the area of the park if they need to. The idea being that maybe there would be a little gateway that you can't see in that iron fence or whatever. Whatever it is, but just the idea is that it has an access point for employees to get into that area if they need to. And you saw me extending that wall along the other edge too. And here behind the wall, just where the greenhouse is, I'm putting a few more trees. That way the wall doesn't just end where the greenhouse ends, and there's a little more immersion beyond the ride itself, because riders will be able to see out of the greenhouse and up over that wall a little bit. So having those trees there just continues the illusion that they are within a forest. And along here, along the front edge of the park, I'm extending our little hedge, and I will put in some various shrubbery items. But the ones I'm putting there on the right side, eventually I delete those because we end up building a gift shop. I realized I didn't have a proper gift shop, nor did I have a proper restroom facility in this area of the park. And I like to have at least one restroom for each section. And the other nearest restroom was technically in the dinosaur section right near that little gateway. And of course, there was one further back in the medieval section. However, we didn't have one for the spooky section itself, and I figured at this point, this far along, we were due for another one. So I sort of made a double wide building. In one section of it, there you can say just place the restrooms, and then in the other little notch I made is where I will place the um, the gift shop. And that gift shop, luckily, there are a couple spooky gift shops. There are actually three. There are spooky jokes, spooky hats, and witches hats. And I ended up putting witches hats here. You may remember if I mentioned it, that the gift shop we used for our haunted manor ride was um, a witch's hats gift shop, but I figured that's not really a witch themed attraction. It's just a spooky haunted house. So I switched that one to the spooky hats, and I put witches hats up here at the front of the area, and then the spooky jokes, which I think it's funny that they call it that. But I looked, and the only item that guests can buy from there is a whoopee cushion, technically. That's the default item anyway. Of course, you can rename it, but I didn't bother because to me it's more just having gift shops than what they sell specifically. Um, so I was not too concerned about it or anything like that. And then, of course, here you could see me putting these little signs in just to denote restrooms from the gift shop. That way, people don't pee on the gift shop floor, I guess. I don't know. And I was experimenting with some different signs because I like having a big sort of sign overarching the entrance of my gift shops. Something a little more realistic, but having the small sign there works, and that's all that I was able to get work. And yeah, certainly it works just fine with that the spooky gift shops, I guess, if that makes sense. Um, or with the spooky signs, I mean, they fit the theme. And ultimately, this is not like a main gift shop, and when people start walking in and out of it, other guests would be able to see anyway. So it's I'm not too concerned about having a giant sign pointing right to it. And then along here, we are putting in our paths and more trash cans, and just finishing up that sort of maintenance of the area. And you can see I decided to go with marble benches. That's sort of another theme, is using the marble or wood benches from the generic scenery. Um, I noticed that a lot of the benches that aren't generic tend to look uncomfortable. So I just sort of go with the generic ones or ones that look comfortable as they work. Um, and I think it works better in the long run. And the marble ones certainly look fine for a foresty, wooded area. And yeah, we are coming up on the end of the video here pretty soon. But I'm putting in some more paths here. You can see this is where I use the Gothic lamps. I remember in the other area I used the miner's lamps. Anyhow, I'm just trying to stretch it out. I can see the playhead slowly getting to the end, and I think that's right about now. So I will see you guys in the next episode, and have a great rest of your day. But really quick side note first, I made a couple changes off camera before I finished editing. Along the left side there, you can see I changed the wall on the back side of the greenhouse and extended the height a little bit just to preserve the sight lines within the park itself so you can't see the hotel. And then you can see along the back side where the stations are, I added a few exits. And that's it. This time, I'll see you guys in the next episode and have a great rest of your day for real. Goodbye.